Probably the screen will go black, but it's still recording.
All right, perfect. Hello, Kylie, and everybody else who wasn't able to be here today. It's kind of a sickness week, but hopefully that'll hold off for everybody else.
Yeah.
I don't think that's wood, but we'll try. So, all right. Well, let's rock and roll. 3 hours till spring break. You can do this. So maybe this was wise because you're all tired of my voice by now and all of our voices. So we'll give you some different voices today and some different perspectives and thoughts. Ideally, like systematic-wise, this would have been nice if it could have been like the second or third week because Tammy's really the early childhood. So we're kind of progressing, early childhood child. We'll get to adolescence when we get back from spring break. But hey, sometimes schedules work out this way. So we're going to take a look a little bit at the early years, which I know, probably most of us won't necessarily want to go in that direction. But maybe, like other things, this might excite you a little bit. Like, oh, maybe I could work a little bit lower. Or at least when you're working with families, parents, and you're working with somebody who's older, but they're talking about their younger and they're asking you questions. There's a lot. I mean, I talk to Tammy, and I'm the adolescent person. We sit down at lunch and we start talking like, oh my gosh, we're talking the same language. It almost doesn't matter what age it is. There's just some principles that cross. And so I think Tammy, hopefully, will just have a lot of wisdom for us today because I love listening to her talk about this stuff. So let me introduce Tammy really quick. I met Tammy, my wife and I met Tammy and her husband in the County Market grocery store.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jen and I had just gotten married. We met, so we have a pocket of friends. You've heard me talk a little bit about how we have this friend group that kind of raised our kids together. Tammy's one of those.
Yeah.
So this is Aunt Tammy to my kids.
Yeah, it sounds like you've done a lovely job with them.
Yeah. Yes.
I love them. They're really cool people.
Yeah, as are hers as well. So, but we met Jason and Michelle because we lived 2 doors down in the apartment building, so we bumped into each other right after we got married. They had got married a week before. And then these strange people, I don't even know how we started talking. Well, they got married a week after we did,
Yes.
and so we just started talking, and somehow we just decided to get together, and then more people came, and so we kind of just had this group of scared young marrieds who just moved to the area who didn't really know anybody else
Yes.
that just kind of glopped onto each other, and it's been a really fun journey together.
And now 26 years later.
Yes.
Here we all are.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Very cool.
yeah, so that's what I know of Tammy. I'll let her introduce all the other important parts, but anything else you need from me?
No, that's great.
Right,
Thanks, Brent.
I'll hand it over.
So I just want to let you know, my name is Tammy Hodgkins. My context for sort of being here, which is on the next one, is I've always been a kid person. Like from the time I was a really little person, I was always the nurturer in the family, all those pieces. I have a sister who's 9 years younger than I am, so I'm the oldest. And I started babysitting her and everybody else in my life when I was really young. So that's always been my trajectory. I'm always like, I love being with children. I love doing all of the things in that realm. So then I went to school for elementary education.
Where did you grow up, though, Tammy?
Oh, I grew up here in Menominee, actually.
4 miles down the road.
Like just, if you've ever been on Highway 12 between here and the Eau Claire exit, if you know the Earth Home on the left side, that's my childhood home.
Oh, wow.
So,
that we took when we had 194 was down?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So weirdly, that is my house. And now I live in the Twin Cities, and but my parents still live in that home. So that's kind of cool. So I grew up here. After high school, I went out and nannied out in Boston for a little while. That's where I met my husband. Moved back here. He followed me back here while I went to school for ed. And I joke around that while I was in school for ed is like the least amount of time I actually spent hands-on with children in my whole life. And then I had kids. I was watching kids out of our house. I was doing all of these other things. And my girlfriend said, how about if we started preschool together? And I was like, oh, whoa, I'm an leg girl. This is a lot for me. So we started doing that, and it quickly became apparent that what we really wanted to focus on in our early childhood community was learning more about trauma-informed care. We wanted to learn about development and what happens really with children in those stages and ages if some of those things get disrupted. We really wanted to serve the children we had in our setting better, because we were realizing that preschool just by itself wasn't going to be sustainable for us, or probably for them for that period of time. And so we have to get continuing ed credits every year as teachers, and most of ours are spent in mental health because we just are really passionate about that. So a lot of what I've learned has been a hands-on doing that for 13 years. So we have, that's where I am now. I'm a preschool teacher. Our community is called Willow and Sprout. It's in Northeast Minneapolis. So we focus on the whole child. We're inspired by social emotional curriculum, Reggio Emilia-based stuff, and we also do a lot of outdoor time and a lot of art because we really think that that's great for children and their learning. We work with children 16 months to 5. We have 14 children a day, 3 teachers. Our schedule is 8 to 5, and we either have a group that comes Monday through Wednesday, or just Thursday, Friday, or all week. So when we were doing our setup, we were just really finding that children that have these sporadic schedules and don't know who's coming what days and can't anticipate when they're coming, that just felt really chaotic for them and for us. So we decided we're going to just simplify the schedule so it doesn't fit everybody. We know that. It's not, but we just have 14 days, so it's not a large place. We also are in a home. So we're a center-based place, but we have a home environment for the children. So we have the whole house, and it's exclusively for the children. So I'm not a therapist, but I've worked with children hands-on for that long, and I think it's a really cool thing that we do, and a really unique sort of perspective. But I always think it's good to know what are people's contexts, so that I'm not a therapist. So there's probably things that I'll say that you'll all be like, oh yeah, no, that's not the way we do it. But in our realm, but I have some perspectives from just a hands-on piece. So I'd love to just quickly get to know you, if that's cool. How many of you have worked with early childhood ages before? A little bit. Or any of you parents? Okay. How many of you know much about early childhood development, or who these children are at these ages? Not a ton. A little bit.
Now
A little bit.
A little bit.
Okay. Okay. So we're in just a minute here, we're gonna start with that. But first of all, we know brains, right? And about every 13 minutes we start to lose each other. So we're gonna try to incorporate some things that I do with our children that maybe y'all will take a little nugget into your practices as we go here. So the first one is we're just gonna put our hands on our hearts, close our eyes, and take a deep breath. Pay attention to your body and if it has anything it wants to remind you about right now. Sometimes our shoulders feel like they need to wiggle. Sometimes our feet feel like they need to wiggle. Sometimes our head. Anything that we feel like needs a little wiggling. Alright, one more deep breath and then we'll open our eyes. So you'll notice we might do practices like that with our little ones, which are just simplified versions of what you might do with some of your adults. So I'll try to give you a few of those as we're moving on today. All right, so we're going to take a crash course in early childhood ages and stages, so we know who these people are that we're going to be talking about. So our babies, I don't work too much with the babies, but babies are really, we're looking at that up to 12 months. They're forming their primary attachments. They're forming object permanence. They're forming constancy with their caregivers. The biggest, as you probably know, the biggest things for that early year of life are the people who are supposed to be there for me going to show up, right? That's the biggest question for babies. And that constancy of care is like baseline. When I cry, do my people notice? All of those things. So toddlers, this is more my jam. We get them when they're 16 months. So they're very egocentric. Everything, they don't really see the world outside of themselves. It's everything at age 2, of course, it's mine, 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 mine. If I had it, it's mine. If I saw it 10 minutes ago, it's mine. If somebody else is playing with it and looks good, it's mine. So those are the things we're working with. Toddlers are the most natural scientists on the planet. Their constant question is, what will happen if I? And so it can be a frustrating stage for parents because it's constant boundary pushing. But their question is really, what will happen if I? Right? They're trying to explore their world. And are they safe inside those parameters that we put up there for them? They typically play alongside peers. We get some parents that are like, is my child making friends? And we're like, they aren't supposed to yet. Is my child being nice to all of the other children? They're not supposed to yet. We will encourage them. We will help teach them. We'll help guide them. But it's not their job to have those skill sets in place yet. So what we're doing is a lot of scaffolding for self-help and for all of our skills. So our method is when they're babies, right, they have everything done for them. We always do 4. But starting with toddlers and on up, we are doing with, means hand over hand. We might be showing them, we might be demonstrating, we might be putting our hands over their hands to teach them how to do something, and then we want to keep backing off those skills, coaching those skills, and then those skills will become independent. We definitely focus on descriptions rather than judgments, and that relates all the way up through our preschoolers too. They don't really understand the idea of that's right or wrong yet. They don't have that skill set. They don't have the judgments of, that's pretty or that's ugly. Those things are not present for them. They're very much dealing in what is in front of them. And so the more, when we're working with them, we can coach those things instead of let's use our hands nicely. We're going to have a gentle hand, or we're going to touch. We're going to pat with 2 fingers. Those kinds of things are more concrete and can make things for them better. Our preschoolers, they are able to see that a little bit more outside in the world exists besides them. They're starting to have, they still deal primarily in that description that we were talking about, but they're starting to engage with peers. But that takes a lot of coaching because it's the first time that they're having those interactions. And if they're the same age, it's the first time they're having those interactions and they're doing it with each other. So that's going to look a little rough sometimes. So we do a lot of script coaching, and that helps children with lots of abilities. So we might say, we might encourage them when they're joining play to say, hey, when you're done, can I have a turn? Or we might give them scripts like that. How can I join you? Those kinds of things when they're looking at joining their peers and play. So providing those scripts and coming up with those scripts with them is a really helpful tool in guiding them through some of those things. And then they have a lot more questions, right? 3s are all about, why? why does that happen? Why does that happen? So they're having a lot more questions about how and why of things working. All right, this is a picture of me and my little sister. But early childhood and into those kindergarten stages. So this is when you go past that Earth home, right? The next house is a little yellow house. This is all the buildings that used to be there. And then we used to have a lot of freedom to play outside and do all the things, but I was definitely a big sister. But that, it just describes, kindergarten and into early elementary for me. Their cognitive skills are increasing. They're looking for categories. So when we see children of those early years make judgment statements, what they're really trying to do is make sense of their world. They're not trying to say, they're not in essence in their being trying to do something they're not supposed to. They're just trying to make sense of things. And so when they make those judgment calls, it's because their brain is trying to classify, right? And again, if you think of that scientific brain development in those stages, they're really trying to classify. They're very black and white thinkers because, again, when you're really making sense of things, you want it to fit in a category. And so if we are reminded that those early years of elementary especially, they're not trying to be malicious when they call something out in someone. They're trying to classify. They're trying to make sense of the world for themselves, right? They tend to be eager learners if their learning is engaging and appropriate for their level. It's when it gets too hard or something gets too easy, right? So that Piaget zone of proximal development, all the philosophies that we all fall under, they lead with curiosity and they lead with observing is the way that practically plays out. So if we can make their learning led with curiosity and observing, that's great stuff. They become more aware of concepts around good and evil, life and death, and they make assumptions and judgments about those things to also make sense of their world. So for me, the cool thing about those early years is how much adults have an influence to guide those early experiences, not just opposing our views, but really partnering with children to be like, we're going to create safe spaces for you to explore the world and make sense of all those things that you're trying to make sense of. The neural pathways formed at those ages set the stage for all of their development going forward. So there's been a lot of studies about brain development in birth to 5, and if we can catch those kiddos in those early years and make a change for them in their environment or their learning or some supports around that, we're huge advocates for that because it happens the quickest that we can turn those things around for them. So if we're needing support because we see some neurodivergence in children, it's a great time to get that early intervention because we know it makes such a huge difference. So those are sort of those ages and stages that we want to just kind of get on the same page about what it is.
Lots of questions?
What else? What are you wondering about, or what do you have about those things? Yes.
So I can tell that you are incredibly passionate about this, and you love what you do, and I love that so much. And I'm wondering if if we're talking birth to 5, and it's like the most important thing, do you feel that pressure?
Yeah.
Or
Sometimes.
okay, or have you learned to be like,
Yeah.
it's cool, but
Sometimes,
yeah.
and especially when you see those little ones that are needing support, right? There is the like, oh, let's get on this, let's bring in those supports as much as possible, and also working with parents at these ages to understand the child they have in front of them, and not the child they wish they had in front of them, is really important too. Right?
Yeah.
And I see that as a huge tie to therapy.
Yes.
So you're not a therapist,
Right.
but you are a therapist. Because you're bringing this, we often bring psychoeducation pieces.
Yeah.
That's why it's important for us to have just at least a base knowledge if we're working with families of some of this, because seeing that
Yes.
neurodivergence in early ones makes it a lot easier than my family where he's
Yes.
17 and I'm still just trying to, like, the parents do not understand the difference of neurodivergence and how he cannot do what they're asking him to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because we obviously talk so much about like caregiver to child here, which we
Mhm.
should, because that's what you're seeing therapy. But it's like we all know that teachers are such a huge, like so many teachers of mine had a bigger impact on me at times in my life than my parents.
Absolutely.
Also weren't therapists, but yeah, they kind of were.
Mhm. Right?
Yeah.
And so there's I think a lot of overlap between like just wanting that environment for the parents and for the children. That's very cool. So we're going to talk about parents. Because I work with a lot of them and I've seen a lot of parents through the years. So I would love for you to just take a minute to think about it for a sec. So think about parents you work with, or if you're a parent, your own parenting. How were you parented growing up? Parents that you've observed. I am curious what initial things that brings up in you.
Oh my god.
This
We
is
were
like
right on
the
the verge
theme.
before you even showed
Yeah.
up, so I'm just like.
I mean, it feels like we've been doing this
Uh-huh.
a lot in this class. I think through what we're reading, what we're talking about, this is where we land here every Tuesday at this time.
Well, we're right on schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Do you feel confident about working with parents, or do you feel nervous about working with parents, or do you feel? What are some of your primary things that, when you're thinking about parents, maybe even let's break it down to like parents of this age kiddo that we're talking about. How do you feel about that? The parents, working with parents of those ages.
It's a little scary, intimidating, since obviously they're a little baby and they're gonna think that everything they do is perfect. Not in all cases, but like there is that kind of like mama bear, papa bear type of sense when they're that young, I feel like, so it can be hard.
Yeah, that's real.
I think sometimes with parents nowadays too, everything's so fast forward. So outside of school, I still work at an eye clinic for an optometry, and we do not only eye exams and fitting glasses, but we do vision therapy. So they come back weekly, and there's homework involved, and it's much like going to therapy, but this is focused on your eyes. And they all go into it with great intentions, but because of life, there's zero follow through. They don't care. They blame the child. So I feel like it's tough because it's like sometimes when I hear parents, I think I relate to what I do now, and
Yeah.
I think it's like, okay, it's great to have experience dealing with parents, but it's really hard because you got to figure out like the right wording. It's hard to, they'll say all these things and then they come back and the student rats them out in 2 seconds. Like,
Right? Yeah.
kids are so brutally honest, so
You
I think that's the part that's a little frustrating. It's, sometimes I don't think any of us is always the kid or just working with children. It's sometimes because of the parents, and you have to, I don't know, just have sensitive language, I guess, and make sure, and some parents are those like over caring, and then you have some that are actually pretty rough about their kid, and I'm surprised that like an 8-year-old coming into vision therapy, how the parents like, yeah, he doesn't do anything, he doesn't try, he doesn't care, and it's like, this is your 8-year-old, and you're throwing your 8-year-old under the bus too. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's really hard to check yourself and not get overly frustrated with that type of parent as well.
100%.
So yes and yes, and also I think from this class, and there have been other times in my life where I've been exposed to these really remarkable parenting concepts or child development knowledge, where I'm like, oh my god, this is the most important thing in the world. Like, if we could parent better, if we could raise healthier, more confident children, like, what is more important in life than getting, the idea of how important it is to give parents skills and knowledge so that they can
understand things better, maybe cope better, connect better. So yes, intimidating, upsetting, but also like maybe some of the most important work.
Yeah. I think it's cool. I think there's a lot of great opportunity. Let's take a look at some stuff. All right, so here's some stuff that I notice about our current parents. I think our post-COVID parents are really struggling, especially with their early childhood babes. So many of the ones that I see, they have a really strong motivator to be a good parent, right? And whatever that looks like, being a good parent is really important to them. And so sometimes there's certain things that they will do or say in a frontward way to protect their image as a good parent, because it's really important to be seen as a good parent. But I think it's really tricky sometimes for them to know what that looks like and what that means, because we'll get into that. I think today's young parents are dividing the domestic labor more equitably than we've ever seen before. That's not 100% the case, but it's more than we've ever seen before. That's changing. It's just something that's starting to change. We see, even just for stuff with us, we see a lot more dads dropping off and picking up than we ever have. We see a lot more dads coming to conferences. We see a lot more partners, parents in general, just sharing the load of what that means to be a parent. They are the most educated group of parents we've ever had in history. So by and large, and again, it also raises the places where we see that inequity in it, right? So we've got all of these highly educated parents, and then we have parents that maybe aren't, and you're seeing that disparity even more starkly too. Internet information is readily accessible. It provides so much information. There's so much information out there for parents. So their parents, we see them wanting that content more, they'll just Google it. They're wondering something, they Google it. But those internet articles, they're contradicting each other. Like this one says I should do it this way, this one says I should do it this way. And again, that motivator to be a good parent, we're seeing all of those things just feel super overwhelming for them. And it's also just not specific to their child. Like their child, they might not find the right piece of information. They might latch on to something. And it's like, yes, that is true. And I see where that article is coming from. And this is the child you have, right? So that information being so readily accessible, it can be really tricky. It deals in a lot of theory, and it can be hard to translate all of that advice into who is this child that you are parenting, not that person over there, right? So despite all that information that's available, it seems like parents are less confident in their parenting, and they have so many options, but they're also more private, because I think that self-protection of wanting to be a good parent, all the things out there, it's like, ooh, there's a lot of pressure to get it right. And I think that desire for a relationship with their children can be overpowering their ability to hold loving boundaries. And it's really tricky, right? A lot of us were brought up in homes possibly where, so this pushback is what I'm seeing. A lot of the parents like we have of our early ones right now, they may have been brought up in a home where their family was really strict about things. They don't want that relationship with their child. Either that, or they were brought up with a lot of you can do it self-positive messages, and they want that for their child, but they don't know how to go about some of those things. So one of the pieces to talk about in the middle of this is this idea of masculine and feminine energy. So, have you talked about much of that? So we all have masculine energy, feminine energy inside all of us, right? All of that is within each of us as humans. Some people lead with more one than the other. They have been termed those energies because traditionally males have been known to have a type of energy, females, but we all know that that's different people have those different energies, right? So one of the things that we're seeing is a turning away from what has been considered to be more masculine energy in parenting, which is more of the you got it, you got this, you can do it, and more of an internal focus on the feminine energy, the caring, the wanting that child to know that they're loved, and all of those pieces. But there's such a balance of that needs to happen in parenting. And so I think one of the trickiest parts then comes in this idea of being able to see your child for who they are. And the balancing of all of that energy. So it's hard for parents and all of us, right, as humans, to sit in the discomfort, which is where the learning happens. We're seeing a lot more of that, how we've talked about in the past, like snowplow parenting, helicopter parenting, all those people that really want to pave the way for their child. The tricky part is that it's really hard. It's really hard to see your child struggle. And I think the idea of what is a healthy struggle versus what is too much of a struggle is a really difficult place to enter in that parenting conversation. But being able to sit in a little bit of discomfort while you're watching your child achieve something that you know they need for the rest of their lives is a healthy place of that discomfort. But because of this desire to be a good parent that's really happening, we see less resilience to be able to sit in those places to see their child struggle in those positive, where there's going to be a positive outcome. It's harder to sit in that daily work of that. So what do we see? We'll see parents in an effort to be a good parent stepping in to do for their child in places that we really want those children to be doing for themselves. And so what does it look like to be the supportive parent, the coach, that sort of role is the place where we talk to a lot of our parents about, like, how do we sit in that place of discomfort with our child and then learning a skill. The other thing that can, it can bring in this over-attending and pity sort of for their child, or what's the opposite of that, right? We just check out. We're not going to deal with that because we in our own minds can't figure out how to step into that in a healthy way. We also know parents generally struggle in parenting at ages that they themselves have struggled or had trauma, so addressing that reality of parents is really critical too. And that's a place where we like, those are places to seek out their own. And that's where we might end up seeing I do feel like this piece is really interesting when you're talking about parenting, because most of parenting, from my perspective, or caring for children in general, or caring for anyone outside of yourself, is
The idol.
Oh, thank you.
The idea that when we are struggling as a parent, right, it's regulating our own bodies before we help regulate the bodies in front of us. And so I think there's a great opportunity for us as people that work with children and work with parents to say, okay, so what are the places that we are, that elicit a response in us? And how do we deal with the response in us before we deal with the actual behavior that's happening? Because that behavior brings up an emotion most often in the person caring for that child. And it's in dealing with that that's going on right there. Why does that behavior elicit that feeling in that parent, right? And getting to the root of that, I think that would be a game changer for our parents. If anybody would be willing to sit in, so your child's doing that behavior, what does that make you feel as a parent? And let's get to the root of why that is coming up in you. And then we'll go back and address the behavior. Because most often, when we have parents with regulated nervous systems, that translates to children. So that's really one of my biggest
Have you
places.
had those conversations with parents in preschool environment?
We have.
Yeah.
Do you get Brian on the phone and you're like,
I don't know 5-year-olds.
I think one of the things that we have going for us, first, it's a lot of gaining trust, right? Because trust is the biggest piece of those relationships. And once we've gained trust, we can usually start to talk to them about their child. And we have a lot of ideas about why that behavior is there. But if we don't have a parent that can hang in there in the discomfort of that feeling without becoming dysregulated themselves, we can't address what's going on with the child. Because, right, it's just producing too much emoting and reaction that comes up too quick. So helping them create this space by maybe some, we can come in with all the techniques we want, but if they're becoming dysregulated while using the techniques, it's not going to happen. It's not going to fix the problem. So, what questions do you have about that? Or observations?
It brings up this thing that someone brought up to me when I was parenting. This is going to be personal, but I hope it's going to be useful. It's also self-incriminating, so I feel like judge away. Someone had mentioned that when you're parenting your child, if you've had a trauma or some sort of situation that is you're ill at ease about from your childhood, when your child becomes that age, unconsciously you start to replicate that situation. Wow, emotional. You replicate a situation for your child unwittingly. Like, and it's not the same situation, but it's the same dynamic. And you don't even know you're doing it until it's pointed out. So that is like I'm assuming that might be going on in a preschool, that parents are like doing things that are not necessarily in conjunction or in response to what their child is going through, but they're living through their own replication process.
100%, yes.
Yeah.
And I think that so much of that is unconscious, right? And that's, I think, when we're dealing with people and they're holding their stories, it's such a place of compassion and care when we get to hear those things, when we get to see those things that come out of their own journeys. And does it affect their parenting? 100%. There's just so many stories. I can't even begin to tell you how often it comes up. Like, either I didn't have this kind of care as a child. So we're snow plowing the way for our child in attempts to give them the care we didn't receive. Or, just there's so much of that in parenting. So even at these little ages, it's starting.
Question.
Yeah.
So I love what I'm hearing, how you want to engage and help support parents in these areas.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do when you have a parent who just doesn't understand what you're saying or is very resistant to what you want to, even if you've developed a relationship and you feel like you want to try to broach that,
Yeah.
and you get a lot of resistance?
Mm-hmm. It's such nuanced work with all of them, isn't it? So relationship is key. So first of all, I'd probably go back to, have I developed some of those pieces in the relationship? The second one that we use a lot is to have them start talking about their dynamics with their child and telling us more about what's happening at home. So the way we run our conferences at Willow Sprout, we do conferences twice a year with parents for a half-hour piece. And we talk about two questions. What are you celebrating about your child? And what are you supporting about your child? And so the celebrating piece lets them get to talk about all the cool stuff they love about their kid, right? Which is awesome. And often we see very similar. And then we do the same thing from the Willow and Sprout angle. And so sometimes what that does is allows those worlds to connect, right? We're seeing this, you're seeing this is something we want to address. But I do think having them talk about the things that they are supporting is often a good way to bridge. So how do you feel about that? What does that raise up in you? Are there things around that you want to address or are concerned about? I think that's where I'd start. Do you have any more specific ideas? That's probably where I'd start.
I just know as therapists, we're all going to run into that. We're going to see something we hope to be able to speak into or start a conversation about. And with some of the parents, you're just going to run into absolute resistance. And then we feel like, well, now what do we do?
Yeah.
We're trying to help this family. And for you, you're still caring for the child in your, so it could just be we'll just do our job and you do yours. For us, it's a little bit different because it's like, are they going to come back? What am I supposed to do with this child when I don't really have access to what I need?
Right.
But in a way, you don't either. You
don't
know
always.
what you need to help further. You can do
Yes.
the basics, but you can't do some of the further work.
Yeah, and we will find so often that if we're working on a scale really a lot at school and we're not getting the support at home, we can just pound our heads against the wall. And until those parents get on board with that idea and we can do it together, it won't change. It just won't. And it's like, we have your child 5 days a week, 9 hours a day, and we do not have the same impact that you have. Right? And it's what's really crazy is that's the truth. Is because that primary attachment of theirs at home is the strongest, loudest thing in their lives. So, but those are ways I would start to bridge that conversation. Yeah. I think it's tricky when you sometimes know what needs to happen.
Yeah.
There's a resistance. I think everybody struggles with that. All right, I'm going to read a book to you. Because at Willow and Sprout, we all eat breaks. We just sit and read.
It's the best day ever.
I want apple juice.
Oh my gosh, cookies and juice.
also love this picture of this cool fox on there. This is in the slides, so if you're interested, it's hard to move for you. Right there. Ooh, it's chilly today. Fox needs to warm up. Time for a cup of hot cocoa. Oh, it's much too hot to take a sip. Fox blows on her hot cocoa to cool her off. And you blow on your out.
Oh my god, I love you. I am like buying everything that you sell right now.
Bring your cup up close to you. Take a long breath in and slowly blow the air out to cool off your. Take another long breath in and slowly blow the air out. Fox takes a tiny little sip of her cocoa. Can you take a tiny little sip? Can you see? Now Fox feels warm and cozy and calm. Take one more tiny little sip, then put your hot cocoa down. Take another long breath in and let the air all the way out. I think the more we can connect children to their bodies, grown-ups to their bodies, people to their bodies, the easier time we have gaining access to all of the other parts, right? Physical is so connected with the emotional, which is so connected with our guts, heads and guts, all of it. Okay, I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about books, because this is one of my favorite things. I think books can be such a bridge to talk to children about things. I think they can be such a bridge to talk to adults about things. I think it can open up conversations by looking at pieces that are hard to look at from the inside. I think if we can put something outside of ourselves, it sometimes really helps. A few of my favorites are up here. If you find that you have a parent that's struggling with a child about a particular topic, sometimes books can be a good opener to start a dialogue. This one is called I Am the Storm. My little sister was absolutely terrified of tornadoes. Terrified. I read her this book as an adult and it was healing. It talks about different kinds of storms. Super cool. When the wind howled and blew loud as a train. We had a party in the basement with Grandma, reading books and playing games with a flashlight. When the wind stopped whirling as tornadoes always do. We picked up the branches and fixed the fence. I danced round and round our front yard, howling and blowing with the wind. When the ice and snow fell, sparkling like fairy dust on the windows, and all the lights went out, we made a fire and cooked hot dogs and marshmallows. When the ice and snow stopped falling, like blizzards always do, we shoveled out our walk, and Mrs. Garcia's too. We built a snowman, and I tossed at big handfuls of snow that fell down upon my head. When the fires burned in a forest nearby, Papa drove us to the lake. We camped out and made new friends. I picked wildflowers and tied them into bouquets. When the forest cooled, as wildfires always do, I brought flowers to all the neighbors while the grown-ups swept the ashes and washed the windows. The air still felt hot as I swayed with my arms up like a slow, beautiful flame. We had a big bowl of ice cream to cool down. When the sea swirled and roiled and rose almost into the sky, we drove away from the ocean to my cousin's house. We pretended the bunk beds were boats high above the waves. The storm was strong, and I was scared. But when the wind and seas calmed, as hurricanes always do, we went back home. It's okay to be scared. Nature is strong and powerful, but I am strong and powerful too. I am loud like the tornado. I am wild like the blizzard. I am hot like the fire. I am fierce like the hurricane. I am the storm. And when the storm passes, as it always does, I am the calm too. So, there are books for almost all the fears. There are books for almost all the worries. It can be good therapy for adults and children to read things like that for things that they've gone through. There's a lot of books about making new friends. This one is about a little neurodivergent gal who worries about how she's going to make friends and has a hard time doing that, and how being herself ends up making her friend. Ruby finds a worry that grows and grows and grows and grows and grows and grows until something happens and she notices a boy sitting alone at the park. And she noticed something hovering close to him. Could it be a worry? They start sharing their worries. And the worries start melting away. And they feel at least like themselves again. And they go to smaller and bigger sizes. Not away, but those kinds of things. There's a lot about worries here. This is a great one about feeling happy and sad. How about feeling emotions at the same time? That there can be more than one way to see and feel an emotion. That you can not just be feeling a single thing, but multiple things at one time, which is something we all struggle with, right? Personal space invaders. Here's a great one about Frankenstein and how cranky he is. This is a few books about feelings. I also have just a couple smatterings of a couple yoga books that we like. There's tons and tons of those. And we'll talk about these sort of developing routines in a little bit. But I think it's really cool when parents and children can share books together in stories, because I think it really helps them be able to process things that are external. Any questions about that? Comments?
So when Tammy talks about reading this to her adult sister and finding healing by going through a story like this, what does that remind you of something we talked about recently in class? Name it to tame it. Iaiwulu. Yeah. So we have those young parts of us that get caught and never had a chance to tell the story. And so this is a great externalizing, we've all heard that word, right? A great externalizing way to begin telling those stories, to let them start to move through our bodies. That's great.
I love books. I think they're just amazing tools. Anything else about that? Okay. Well, I heard y'all take breaks every hour on the hour. So this is one of them.
We try. Unless I get long-winded. I usually